Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Seascale leukemia cluster. In 1984, an ITV documentary revealed higher than average cases of leukemia in children living in the town of Seascale, Cumbria, England, between the years of 1955 and 1983. The documentary caused public outcry and led to an investigation into the cause. What happened in Seascale? Seascale is a small coastal town on the Cumbrian coast of northwest England. It currently has a population of about 1,710. Seascale lies on the western coast of the Lake District National Park. It's a popular tourist spot. It also happens to be situated near Sellafield Nuclear Complex. The ITV documentary revealed 7 cases of leukemia in the small town. It would have been expected that there would be less than 1 case found in such a small population. Cancer cluster is the name given to a situation where there are more cancer cases than would be expected for the given population. Most cases of cancer clusters turn out to be coincidences. The cancer cluster in Seascale began in the 1950s and ended in 1990. The rates of 2 types of cancer, both leukemia and non-Hodgkin lymphoma, were higher than usual. An independent advisory group confirmed the ITV reports of about a 10-fold excess occurrence of childhood leukemia over a 30-year period. The Sellafield Nuclear Complex was immediately blamed for the cancers. It was believed that ionizing radiation from radioactive material was being discharged into the environment and that radiation was causing the cancers. A detailed radiological risk assessment was performed, and it determined that Seascale children did not receive more radiation than would be received from natural radiation in the environment. The study determined that children received less than 1% of the dose required to cause the leukemia cases. By July 3, 1984, the plant had been cleared, although the study was doubted. People wondered about the accuracy of the radiological risk assessment. Were the discharge and dose estimates accurate? The study also said that if Sellafield were responsible, other areas around the installation would also have seen cancer clusters. The study found a higher incidence of childhood leukemia near Dunray Nuclear Plant, especially in the town of Thurso. This led people to believe that Sellafield was responsible. However, it was determined that exposure in Thurso was less than 0.1% of the exposure required, even less than Seascale. The study's determinations led to the creation of the Committee on Medical Aspects of Radiation in the Environment, or COMAR. COMAR advises the government in UK on radiation. COMAR was created in 1985. COMAR believed that Sellafield was at least partially responsible for the cluster, but didn't conclude that this was necessarily due to radiation exposure. In 1990, a possible explanation was found. It's believed that radiation may have been responsible for the cluster, but not radiation exposure received by the children, but rather the radiation exposure of the fathers that worked in Sellafield prior to conception. This suggestion came from a study of young people in West Cumbria, but was only based on a small number of cases. This explanation does not explain the absence of excess cases in children whose fathers worked at Sellafield, but who did not live in Seascale. The conclusion was also not confirmed by independent data, so the hypothesis was abandoned. Cases continued to rise in children living near some nuclear plants throughout the 1990s and 2000s. Analysis of these cases was not obvious, and the risk assessed from the radioactive discharges was too small. The cases were compared to the radioactive fallout from things such as the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which affected people worldwide. The radioactive fallout didn't cause an increase in childhood leukemia, which suggests nuclear installations are not to blame for the clusters. The timing of the clusters has added to the mystery. In Seascale, the cluster began in the 1950s and ran through at least the early 1990s. In Dunray, the increase seems to have been clustered around the 1980s. Later studies showed the cancer clusters in both Dunray and Seascale ended in the early 1990s. In 2006, Comer confirmed the Seascale cluster was gone. It also confirmed that radiation from Sellafield was not the cause of the cluster. Dr. Chris Gibson, the chair of Comer, said, "The best estimates of the radiation doses to both the Seascale and Thurso populations are much too small to account for the observed numbers of cases of leukemia and NHL that occurred in the young people in these areas, and current radioactive discharges are substantially lower than historic levels." Gibson also explained that it's likely the cluster was caused by some sort of infectious agent. In 1917, Gordon Ward was the first to suggest that leukemia may have an infectious basis. While leukemia itself is not infectious, it may be caused by an infectious disease. Clusters of some sort of infection would explain the clusters of leukemia. The Seascale cluster led to the idea that childhood leukemia is a response to a common but still unidentified infection. This ties in with the idea that population mixing may be responsible for the cluster. Mixing populations from rural and urban areas can lead to mini epidemics of infection that may cause leukemia. Seascale did have a large mixing of the populations over 40 years because of Sellafield. This effect was also seen during World War II as well, when factories built in West Cumbria led to the influx of workers from urban areas. There was a rise in childhood leukemia deaths in the area. The effect was also seen on remote Scottish islands of Orkney and Shetland when soldiers were stationed there. There are several possible explanations for the Seascale cancer cluster. Some believe that there was a defect in the radiological risk assessment that was overlooked. This seems unlikely, however. Others think that it's possible that too much attention was paid to just some pieces of the puzzle, leaving important risk factors to be ignored. Comer says that there are important risk factors that can create localized, higher incidences of cancer near some nuclear installations. Others blame population mixing. Some blame the leukemia on an inciting infection. What caused the cancer cluster in Seascale? Was Sellafield somehow responsible? Was it caused by an infection? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.